Hey there, folks. Zane from the Infinite Jukebox, aka the #1 Gang of Four fan, here with another quick album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Yard Act record, Where's My Utopia? Yard Act have been on the rise in the ongoing British post-punk revival scene for a while at this point, and despite their commercial success, despite their popularity as one of the bigger names within that scene, it kind of feels like they've always been a little bit less important than some of their peers. I mean, despite nearly reaching the popularity of some of the most major names from that region, like Fontaine's DC, and honestly eclipsing the popularity of some more notable critical darlings like Squid and Dry Cleaning, Yard Act have managed to show off their ability from a technical standpoint, but never really managed to create their own identity with their first full-length studio album, The Overload, back in 2022. I mean, that's a good record. I enjoy that record quite a bit. In fact, I think I like it a little bit more than the average person does. The songwriting is pretty strong and clever at times. The instrumentals are very good, albeit a bit unoriginal. But even still, none of it ever really felt essential. It felt like music for people who just need a little bit more semi-traditional post-punk in their life that don't want to go into the crazy avant-prog tendencies of bands like Black Midi, or some of the more experimental chamber tendencies of a band like Black Country New Road, or even some of the more serious and darker sounds of a band like Shame. It always felt like Yard Act was the post-punk revival band for people who couldn't really click with the rest of the post-punk revival bands. So, yeah, their first full-length album, The Overload, it was a very strong debut that nonetheless didn't really push any boundaries within their scene or develop a unique creative or artistic identity for the band, and I don't really think I was expecting much different from this record. In fact, I didn't even know if I was going to cover it until I actually listened to it. Where's My Utopia attempts to change up Yard Act's reputation within music nerd circles and stuff, and also the general public perception that has been bestowed upon them with their particular meat and potatoes post-punk sound up to this point. And honestly, I think it's extremely successful. Yard Act's latest release sees them really lean into a lot of the rhythm first and groove focused tendencies that they've demonstrated in the past but never fully embraced to the point that they could be claimed as totally danceable or anything like that. And I mean, that was definitely a pretty bold decision to make. I think they could have definitely lost the dry wit spark that they had on their debut if they had gone too much into a more just accessible or pop oriented direction. But a lot of the disco adjacent influences that are picked up on Where's My Utopia provide an extremely interesting, extremely endearing, and extremely impressive bit of evolution for the band. I mean, the grooves here have a certain punch that's consistent throughout the entirety of the record, and I think it also opens the gates for some of the most nuanced and detailed instrumentals that we've gotten from Yard Act up to this point, with a lot of tracks that you're actually able to dive into beyond the most in-your-face post-punk instrumentals possible, whether that's the twinkling synths on Grifter's Grief or the subtle strings on tracks like The Undertow. I think that this is some of the most impassioned and fine-tuned work that Yard Act have put out, even though they never really sacrificed the raw energy that they've had since day one. The band stand out instrumentally here much more than they have in the past as well. I mean, for example, you have the bass work of Ryan Needham throughout the record, very, very strong. The back half of the lengthy, rambling Blackpool Illuminations especially has some really tight low-end work from him, and I might be kind of biased there as a bassist, but I really do find him to be quite impressive, especially on that track. You have Sam Shipstone's frantic guitar work throughout a variety of tracks here, like Dream Job, that really add this chaotic aura to at least a good chunk of the record. I mean, I really feel like his presence, as long as he manages to kind of stay in a rhythmic tone throughout the record, which he absolutely does, is what provides a lot of the energy here. I mean, the bass work and drum work, the rhythm work here is for exactly that, rhythm, and it's kind of up to Shipstone to provide a lot of the more raw, garagey energy that they need to really blossom in the way that they do here, and in that regard, he certainly succeeds. And hey, that's not to mention drummer Jay Russell, who, like I said, doesn't really stand out a ton because of the fact that rhythmic instruments are used for the heavy groove-based instrumentals here, but at the same time, if you are someone who's passionate about performances in that sort of context, he does a great job here as well. I mean, again, heavy rhythm-based instrumentals, a lot of the more dance-like influences being found here would not be possible without his contributions as a percussionist. The most polarizing quality of Yard Act has seemingly been frontman James Smith, and the point of contentiousness that often falls around his performances for the band is something that I don't necessarily think will really be changed via Where's My Utopia, but for what it's worth, I do think that he has grown a lot here as a performer and delivers the best work he has so far with the band. Don't get me wrong, he's still the self-assured, smug hipster that he perhaps unintentionally, perhaps intentionally conveyed himself as on the Overload, but I do think he becomes a much more multifaceted and multi-dimensional figure here throughout the record, which is really a good thing because I think that is certainly a quality that needed to change for Yard Act to become a superior band than they were on their debut. Down by the Stream, for example, sees Smith take on a sort of sense of self-awareness as he reflects on this fictionalized account of him acting as a bully in childhood, and then taking that information into his growth as a person as he encourages other people, specifically in that song, his son, to not act that same way, though there is, I would assume, an intentional degree of irony as he implies that he would enforce that sort of good-heartedness through a lot of aggression, thus kind of potentially showing that he hasn't changed nearly as much as he wants the listener to think. Again, fictionalized account, not saying he's actually a bad person, but yeah, you get what my point is. You also have the track We Make Hits, where he kind of walks this really narrow tightrope between being serious and satirical, talking about and somewhat mocking the fact that Yard Act are now one of the premier names of the post-punk revival and are commercially successful and a, commercially viable band for a lot of different things like advertisements and, big hit songs, while also celebrating the camaraderie of the band and the fact that they aren't some sort of manufactured industry product, and for that I commend them. Not to mention tracks like Fizzy Fish, where Smith really just, in this very kind of abstract way, rambles about how his life is changing in the course of the past couple of years in particular, as he's become more famous, become more involved in the music industry, and it's done so in a way that I feel is simultaneously earnest and comedic, and because of that I feel like it's uniquely his, even if some people will understandably find it kind of obnoxious. James Smith seemingly is always participating in this gray area between being genuine and self-parody, and yeah, that certainly won't be for everybody, but I personally think that it works out very well for him. I don't mean to say that people who didn't like Smith's vocals in the first place will suddenly be converted believers by the end of Where's My Utopia or anything like that, as he does share many qualities on this record with his performances on The Overload, but I will say that for individuals such as myself who listened to The Overload, enjoyed it, saw him have some degree of potential, but didn't really think he was totally there yet as a performer, but still enjoyed him and wanted to see him grow, this is the growth that I, and I would say many others, were hoping for. I think Where's My Utopia is the artistic leap forward that Yard Act really needed to succeed in terms of actually fulfilling their potential. I think The Overload is a very good album, but I think it was primarily to lay the groundwork of a band with a ton of potential, and the question was in the air of whether or not Yard Act would actually capitalize on that and develop themselves, flesh themselves out more as a band, and on Where's My Utopia, they do both of those things absolutely. All of the new influences that are found here, the new much higher degree of energy that's found here, a lot of the lyrical content here has improved compared to The Overload, and I would almost argue that this nullifies their debut, not because their debut is weak, it's very strong, and I do recommend it, and I would say check it out if you haven't already, but because of the fact that Where's My Utopia has so much more of a unique creative identity than The Overload did. While Yard Act's latest album certainly won't be for everybody and understandably won't click with some people, I really do think that a newfound sense of energy and legitimate creative growth ultimately combine to result in a great record. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this quick album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.